everything, but I would like to focus on the overall partnership that we have and work forward from there. Bedford Township, the Sheriff's Office, and the county have been partners on behalf of the citizens of Bedford Township and the county for decades. We certainly ought to be able to find a way to continue that. We're not here to tell you what to do or how to go about analyzing the value of the partnership between the sheriff, the county, and Bedford Township. I know you're capable of doing that, and will give it full consideration and due diligence. Lowest cost is not always best value. I know that you understand that. My singular request on behalf of our sheriff's deputies who serve and protect our citizens every day is that you would proceed with your decision. If you decide to end the relationship with the county, I am sure you will have fully understood the impact of that decision. Likewise, if you decide to remain in the county partnership, you will understand the value of that decision. Tonight, I'm asking for your courtesy in making a decision so that the sheriff and the county can plan accordingly. We have a deputy staffing plan in place to address our staffing, recruiting, and hiring needs through 2020. If you decide to end the contract, we want to be able to absorb our experienced and qualified deputies into our ranks. The county and the sheriff do not want to jeopardize their employment as law enforcement professionals. So the sooner you act, the better for everyone involved. We are prepared to have this discussion with your board this evening. I have other comments, but I'll be brief, and as appropriate, we can get to those later.
Thank you very much. Okay, number 2 is approval of the agenda.
Don't have an agenda.
You guys don't have any agenda. I'm the only one. Okay.
We
Well,
don't vote during cow meetings.
okay, number 3 is discussion of the Monroe County Sheriff's contract. One of the main questions that has come up over the past 6 months is the hours we're supposed to get. How many hours, does the contract provide? How is it broken down with vacation, sick time? And how can they backfill? And in the last few months, we've come up with what we think is a clear understanding of it. So I'm going to call Mr. Frederick up to the whiteboard, and he's going to kind of run through our first main question, for me anyways. And I think it clears up a lot of confusion about it. So use that. I think everybody on the board got a handout that's highlighted.
Over the past 2 or 3 months, we've spent a lot of time trying to understand the contract that we have between the township and the sheriff deputies, actually the county. One of the questions was, what are we entitled to in terms of service? We do know that we have 10 deputies who are assigned to work in Bedford. May not be the same 10 at any particular time, but that's what we're looking at. So one of the things we said was, if you have an employee or a deputy, 52 weeks at 40 hours per week, everybody who is a personnel person knows that is equal to 2080 hours per year. That's what you expect of your employee. That's what you pay your employee. Now, over the year, This will be reduced by vacation. It'll be reduced by holidays. It will be reduced by sick days if you have earned them. So this is the maximum that you expect to receive. We have 10 deputies assigned to us. And out of that, you would expect 20800 hours per year. If they were our employee. No different than if we hired someone for our maintenance department. We would hire them for 2,080 hours per year. But they are not here 100% of the time. Rather, they are here 80% of the time because that's a relationship we have with the county. We pay 80%, the county pays 20%. So if we take 80% of this number off the top of the head, because we're going to pay any time that that deputy is off, we're going to pay any time that that deputy is in training. That turns out to be 16,640 hours is what we believe, using the documents from the sheriff. Those are the number of hours a contract deputy, 10 of them, should be delivering to the township annually. Using the sheriff's data, we're not making this up out of some whole cloth. Using the sheriff's data, in 2017, contract deputies, as defined by the sheriff, delivered 16,601 hours. That's by their definition. 2016, 16,184. 2015, 16,025. The difference is provided by the sheriff with other deputies. Because in the same year, the total hour of services to Bedford, according to the sheriff documents, 2017, 19,584 hours, which includes the contract deputies, others who came here on to provide services like Detective Hooper and others. 2016, it was 20,622. Am I reading that right? I don't have my glasses. I should get my glasses on. In 2015, it was 21,824. We are paying for 16,000 hours. That's what we pay for. We don't pay the full cost because the split has been for years 80-20. Why did that come about? Because the sheriff at that time said, I can't dedicate the full time of these deputies to you if I need them in Erie, if I need them in Whiteford, or if I need them someplace else. They will be out of your district. And the time the board said, well, we're not going to pay when they're out of the district. So that's how the 80-20 partially came up. We expect this kind of delivery of service at the minimum by contract officers, but we know contract officers are off on training. We know that contract officers are off on vacation. So there's a fill-in that is necessary. Now, I'm using only their data. They delivered this, this, and this, but their total hours were over here. Therefore, it would appear, based on our 80-20 relationship, that they are delivering, the sheriff department is delivering at least the hours that cover what we're paying for. Mr. Supervisor.
Stay up there. Does anybody have any questions on the panel for what he's done? Ms. Tinevere, I seen your facial expression, so I assumed you do.
I'll turn that off.
Yeah, I mean, where do you find that in the contract?
I'm sorry, find what?
Where do you find that in the contract?
Find that in the contract?
Yeah, what you're, the 80-20, it says on 3.1, in consideration of the assignment of the contract deputy sheriff positions, the local unit shall pay to the county 80% of the current contract rate. It says nothing
I can
about
do it
80%
either. You can
of
do
the
it either by
hours.
dollars, or you can, if this deputy is $1, you're still only paying 80 cents. If the one deputy is providing 2,080 hours, and we expect to pay 80% of that, it
Well-
does, it's, let me explain it differently. If you
We're not paying
put
for
an employee in
80% of-
place, pardon?
We're not paying for 80% of the hours.
You're paying for
We're paying-
80% of their performance. Their
No.
performance is measured by hours.
Okay, well, you have a base rate of pay. We'll use $20 an hour.
Yeah.
Okay? You get $20 an hour, 80% of that is what?
16.
$16. Okay, $16 an hour is what we're paying for 2,080 hours.
Less the time that they're not at work.
Okay, well, then it also says in here that we're paying for vacation, training,
Sure, you
sick
are.
time.
We do that for our own employees.
But you're taking those hours off.
Out of here, at the top.
I know, but then why are we paying for them if you're taking them off? I don't want to argue this,
Oh, I
I
know
just see
that.
it differently.
Well, that-
and-
Well, that's the ticket.
Then my
going in.
recommendation
We
to
need
you
make sure-
is,
We need to make
look
sure.
at it differently and explain it differently. This is the one way I'm explaining.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Mr. Basonic, come to the mic, okay? Because the goal in this is that everybody understands these questions. We don't want to leave here with any questions.
Yeah, okay. We're going to do a little different.
Okay, this is my question then. Do you reduce the hours by 80%?
No. Because the,
Hold on, you got to use the microphones.
it's on.
Hello? Hello? Okay. I'm going to do it a different way, and I'm
Here.
still going to demonstrate that we're hours ahead.
Here, hold on one second.
Don't take it all the way.
No, that's not.
Stop. Because I
Too
still
quick,
want
too
to,
quick.
I want to see,
I should have called him ahead of time so I knew what he was going to do.
okay. So let's start with our 2,080 hours.
That likes it.
You know, that's a 52 weeks, same as you've got.
Not loud enough. Gotta be close.
In the contract in section,
Mike, can you talk closer to that microphone?
is it working now?
Now it is, yeah.
I didn't want to get that close to the microphone. Okay, so if you go into the contract, there's a provision for leave time, vacation time, and
All of
it's 35 days,
Per 35 days per deputy.
3.3, 35 days per deputy. So 35 days times 8 hours a day. That's 280 hours, okay? So that gets you down to 1,800 hours per officer per year. You've got 10, 18,000 hours. 18,000 hours in each one of those years, the contract has been exceeded. If you take the difference between what the aggregate is for the year, for the contract, 18,000 law enforcement hours, call them law enforcement units, call it anything that you want.
It's in the back. What are you looking for?
Looking for multiple sheets of data. I need to find the right one. Okay, there it is.
You end up at the same place.
So
I'd
you've
like
got,
to say that when
okay,
you get done.
15, 16, and 17. So the difference in 15, Sheriff's Office reported 21,824 actual hours versus 18 on the contract. That's 3,824. If you multiply that by the hourly rate, the additional value, and funny people tend to,
Doing it by dollars and cents.
we tend to reduce everything to a dollar calculation. That's the additional value to Bedford Township above the contract in 15. In 16, it's 139,648, and in 17, which was a tough year with some transitions, 85,378.
But you get the same results both ways, right? It's just you're doing it dollars.
Yeah, Lamar and I have each arrived at a bottom line conclusion is under the contract, you're getting the hours that are required to be provided under the contract in each one of these years. I just want to demonstrate for you the value. I'm just reducing it down to the dollar. 449,342.
Complicated.
Of extra.
Correct.
Okay, Ms.
Now-
Tinever?
No, at its simplest arrangement, it truly is. It's an 80-20 cost-sharing arrangement. County and the sheriff are co-employers in this relationship. County determines the positions that are funded, the compensation, along with the collective bargaining process, and the sheriff hires, assigns, fires, and directs the workforce. And in the 80-20 relationship that we have with the local unit, you pay 80% of the cost, county pays 20%, less the 3% administrative fee. And that's reflected in each one of the invoices on a quarterly basis. And then I provided to you the total over the last 5 years, and you'll see that over the last 5 years, those costs have generally trended down. I don't think they'll continue to trend down, but I think that's been the marketplace in terms of compensation where we've been, but I think this is most important in terms of value.
Ms. Tinever, you had a question?
Well, what we're here to discuss is the contract and the contract wording. It says nothing in the contract about 80% of the hours. So in figuring the fact that our 10 deputies have not, excuse me? Wait,
I said that's the 18,000 hours is what the contract requires.
I'm not disputing that there isn't a value. The whole thing is, this is not personal. This is business and business 101, where there's clarity between one, party and the other party when you have an agreement. The contract says nothing about 80% of the hours. Every place it talks about compensation, it talks about current contract rate. What is the current contract rate?
Whoever's going to talk needs to have the microphone so everybody at home could hear you, just so you know.
This base rate that is referred to in the contract.
In 2017, based on actuals, $53.90.
$53.90 for their base pay.
It'd be 42
And
something.
was that in addition to their benefits, the vacation, the training, all of that, or does that include the benefits?
That includes everything.
Okay, and those figures that you have there are based on $53.90?
No,
No.
they're based on each year's. So this was
Okay.
this was year 2015, 16,
hours
and
worked.
17.
How long is your contract? Does it change every year, or
For our deputies?
Right.
Yes.
changes
Yeah,
every year?
It's a June 1 renewal right now.
Okay, so it's a percentage increase every year.
Correct.
The-
As well as when the benefit changes
Right.
are impacted as well.
The difference in your numbers there is that we're contracting for 18,000 hours for contract deputies. It doesn't say anything in here. Actually, what it does say in here about your backfill is that it's not charged to the township. So the actual hours that the contract deputies worked are what we're paying for. That's the way I interpret it. Now, again, we're talking about the contract. I'll tell you right now, my interest here is not to have anything other than a contract with the sheriff's department. However, I think it's only fair to our taxpayers that we clarify the language. If we're going to do 80% of the hours, let's put it in there. If we're going to do, not based on the 10 contract deputies, but whoever fills these positions, then let's put it in there. I just want honesty and transparency on both sides, because I've read this contract many, many times, and it is very confusing, and the answers from the sheriff were very confusing.
Well, I think you asked the question about making sure that the township is paying for what you're entitled to under the contract. Whether you take Lamar's analysis, which is fine, or you take ours, in either one of these, you're getting everything that you're entitled to under the contract in terms of 10 deputies, 2,080 hours a year, less the training time, vacation time, and leave time that they're entitled to. The aggregate contract is you're entitled to 18,000 hours of law enforcement units per year, and we are providing that.
That's at the sheriff level.
Right.
But,
And here's the hours that have been provided that I think the
but
Major
why,
Kemp has provided to you in each one of his reports.
I've seen that, but why are we taking off the 280 hours when we are paying for their vacation and sick time and all that? We're paying for that. So why are you reducing those hours? Because we have to pay for them anyway.
The county has to pay for them, and the
Says-
township shares in that cost in an 80-20 cost-sharing arrangement.
Right. Right, 80/20, but that's all of that. 280 is all the hours. Okay, I'm just saying it's very confusing, and for my part, I would like to see some willingness to sit down together and make some changes in the contract that are very confusing.
But everybody on this board agrees we're getting our hours, okay? Whether it be the 16,601 in 2017, okay? It shows that we're 39 hours short right there without the backfill. I think the confusion might come in for some people is who can they backfill with? Can they backfill with Detective Hooper? Can they backfill with Major Kemp? Can they backfill with the DARE officer? Okay? Without those people on it, even just with patrolmen coming through our township, we're still superseding the 16,640 by far. So I think what Ms. Tinnevery's saying is we got to clean up that contract portion of it to where it's clear of who you can backfill with. Okay? And I think that would help a lot, Mr. Steiner.
Speaking of the backfill, Lamar, if you could step this way just a second. If you look at the numbers, 18,000 is your baseline. Take the first year there, 2017, 19,584. This is simple math. The sheriff's department is billing us up to 18,000 law enforcement unit hours, whatever you want to call them. We're not billed for the 19,584 because the backfill came from people that are not billable. So if it was 16,000, the most that they could bill up to would be the 18,000, provided they met that. Am I not correct? And then anything over and above that, 18 to the 19,000, et cetera, you're not billing us for those.
Correct.
So
Thank you.
do you agree that's one question on the contract, or one area on the contract we could tweak a little bit, so both parties understand it more?
I mean, we can move away from a deputy kind of position into annual hours where units are provided, units of law enforcement services are provided, if you're more comfortable with that kind of language, and then just doing it on billable hours.
Does
That's
anybody,
fine if that's.
Law enforcement
more
hours
comfortable.
is a pretty simple term across the board, no matter
Yeah.
who's filling it.
Ms. Tinberry, do you have a suggestion of how we could tweak that question or that language a little bit to where it's more understandable?
No, not specifically that question, because the bill, and by the way, you made a statement that is not accurate. I am not agreeing with those hours because it says contract deputies, and the assessment that I have done shows that some contract deputies made their hours monthly or yearly, but not all of them. Because I question what you said about whether a deputy is driving through the township. I mean, there's documented hours on here of 0.5. How can you get any law enforcement activity when someone has only spent 0.5 hours in the month? To me, we're getting a mix of all different kinds of people, but if they're just driving through the township, I don't consider that policing or what I feel we should be paying for. I do think that wording can be changed, but not exactly on what was offered.
Mr. Steiner?
Just and I'll just pose my question or comment my thought process. I know how we can get a half hour. Deputies driving, as Mr. Peroni stated, through the township. He's not technically on duty for Bedford Township at that time. He's driving through the township. Somebody's speeding. He pulls the gentleman or woman over. He is now on Bedford's clock. Is that correct or not? And that could constitute possibly a half hour during that traffic stop.
I can clarify some of that. Where it becomes an issue, well, let me start off by saying that the sheriff's office, we've been the primary law enforcement agency in Monroe County for 200 years. And we've had a contract here with the citizens in Bedford for about 40 years. And we're dedicated to keeping that, and we're dedicated to make this work. And I think it's a good idea that the board look at the contract and be familiar with it, because you have to know what you're paying for and what you're getting. There was a lot of misinterpreted material that's out there. There are a lot of lies that are out there, and hopefully I can clarify some of that. Let me start off by saying that when we do a shift bid for deputies, for the 10 officers, it goes by seniority annually, and then that can actually change, year to year. For many years, we had the same 10 people that worked here. We have a very large turnover of retirements and things like that over the years. So we've had a lot of turnover and a lot of different people working down here. And so when people get different assignments, or they move, or they get promoted to sergeant, or they bid a different position, we have to have a different person come down. And you down here in the contract, you have a lot of very highly trained, highly qualified people who are, canine handlers. They're on the SRT team. They're field training officers. They're medical examiners. They're on the dive team. Okay, so those specialty skills that these officers possess are used throughout the county by all the citizens. The county, the sheriff's office, pays for all that training. And so if we need to pull those officers out of the contract for another detail, I have to have the ability to backfill their time. A perfect example is you currently have a deputy who is a military reservist. And he's deployed for training through the military, about 10 days a year, sometimes more than that, depending on, what they got going on. Those particular hours are not necessarily spelled out in the contract as something that that don't have to backfill. So, and the biggest hurdle for me as a manager is the fact that all my people don't work day shift weekends off. We're a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365 operation. Every officer has different days off. We stagger the days so you always have coverage on all your shifts. And so it would be impossible for me to assign a deputy to work those 10 days that officer's gone. One particular guy or gal, it would be impossible for me to replace that because they may not be on the same schedule, if that makes sense. If Deputy Bennis is off Monday, Tuesday, I might have to replace him with somebody who's on a different rotation. So that's where you get a variety of people that are working down here. We assign them from all over the county, general fund road patrol officers that come down here and they backfill in the township, and that's where you get the extra hours. And I have to have the ability to do that because, dive training, SWAT training, canine training, all these different specialty skills that these deputies possess, it's important to keep up on them for liability purposes, and we need them. To be honest with you, we need them and we use them, right? So 2017 seemed to be the hottest contention of topics because it was the lowest hours of those three. So let me start by saying that 2017 was extremely challenging for us because during the campaign and thereafter, there was a lot of talk about Bedford Township starting their own police department. And we had some retirements and we had some positions opening. For us to train somebody and get them on the road on a full-time basis is roughly $25,000. And for the sheriff to ask the county for that money, $250,000 to train 10 officers for the positions we had open, that was not something that he wanted to do because he wanted to be responsible with the tax dollars. We didn't want to train 10 officers and then send them to another department if Bedford decided to start their own police department. So 2017, we were shorthanded. We went for about 6 months just waiting to see what was going to happen with the law enforcement committee and things like that. And then we had two unexpected retirements, and we had an officer that went off, one of your contract officers that went off on, it's been off for almost a year. Those were not planned vacancies. So the sheriff got with Mr. Bosonic and Human Resources Department, and the county was fortunate enough that they gave us the ability to have a hiring plan to replace these officers so we can so this is easier for us. Us backfilling these positions in 2017 was extremely hard. You got to remember, in 2010, we had 36 road patrol officers. And at the start of 2017, we had 18. Okay, so we have the lowest staffing level since the 60s. So we're doing the best we can. And in 2017, we had 35 deputies that were assigned to Bedford Township that worked shifts down here. This was their primary assignment for that day. Okay. We had, but prior to the sheriff taking office, when we had activity logs, most of them were done by hand. They were calculated by hand by a secretary, and we decided we had to come up with something better because we wanted more accurate stats. So the program that we have now allows ability for us to maintain and keep better statistics on the hours spent in the contract, what the hours are doing. And if you look at 2017, even the officers in here that were assigned to Bedford, if they were working from the Petersburg sub, they would deduct their drive time from the Petersburg sub to here and back at the end of their shift, so that you knew exactly what you were getting when those people were here in the township. And that's how we've been trying to keep the statistics as accurate as possible. So for us to for when it comes to backfilling, you know, I can tell you right now that, you know, I know that there's at least, you know, I put a couple officers, you know, in the contract. You know, these deputies, this is not their assignment that they bid, okay? But they're doing it. You know, they're not complaining. They're filling the positions. But I'm going to have to move them out at some point, you know, because I need their skills, you know, elsewhere in the county. You know, we have an officer, one of your officers is going to be going into another assignment. So when you see your list of who worked here, like 2018, you're going to have 15, 20 different people that were assigned out of here. All right, until we get our hiring to where it's flattened out and we have the staffing levels, then we'll see that level off some. And that way the statistics will be different too. You won't have as many backfilling, you know, issues with that.
Ms. Tinderberg, back to your question with your concern to the hours. Is there anything that you can ask differently to understand it more or help us? I mean, because you still have questions on it, that you don't agree with that. How can we clear that up? You said you don't agree with what's up there.
I don't, but
Well,
you
tell
can't
us
clear
what
it
you
up
do-
because I look at the hours reported, and they don't come up to the 2,080. I haven't been convinced, since the contract doesn't say anything about 80% of the hours. I'm not convinced. And it's, you know, we're not to the question yet about on their bill. It says 280,000 were billed quarterly.
Well, Mr. Francis said he can help clear it up.
Oh, here, $280,299, but it doesn't say, it says for 10 deputies, but it doesn't, how can it be the same every single month when it's based on hours?
Go ahead, Mr. Francis.
Does anyone at this table have a problem with saying the hours equates to the numbers that are shown on there in black?
I don't, but Nancy does. That's why I'm trying
Well,
to get to
to me,
where we all
to
understand
me,
it.
the numbers in red really complicated the issue. It's much more complicated than it really needs to be. We're paying for 80% of the dollars, and we're paying for 80% of the hours because the hours times the rate equals the dollars. You end up at the same thing, the same place. When we throw the 1,800 hours in, all that does is it factors down what are the working hours, not what are the total hours. We're paying for the total hours, not the working hours. Because we pay our share of the time that they're off on vacation, when they're off on training, when they're sick, when they're whatever. We pay for that. We pay 80% of that. So ignore the 18. It's not germane to our argument, in my opinion. It's the hours on the right-hand side. A total of 20,800 hours for 10 deputies, and we're paying 80% of that. 80% of the dollars, 80% of the hours. That gives a total of 16,640 hours that we are paying 100% of. And our monthly reports show the hours that are charged to Bedford, if you will. Not really the right term, but spent in Bedford on our nickel. And 16,640 is the total. And they're very close. Those are just the contract deputies. The backfill position, which the Sheriff's Department has done for 40 years, is on top of that. So they far and exceeded the 16,640. Now, maybe some of those hours you can dispute, well, how can somebody charge 5 minutes or a half hour? It doesn't matter. If you're 3,000 hours over for a year, there's not a lot of those included in there that are going to be germane to our argument. We're getting what we're paying for, in my opinion.
Okay,
And complicating it with the 1,800 hours just wasn't needed.
Mr. Fredericks.
I knew this was going to be controversial. and Ms. Tenberry is correct, that the contract doesn't clearly express whether we should be looking for so many hours of service, no hours of service. Can you calculate it by dollars and cents? Because I've looked at the monthly billing, and the monthly billing, if you take a look at the quarterly cost per deputy, it's $112,119 for the year, and we pay 80% of that. So it doesn't make any difference if you attack this from dollars or if you do it the way Mr. Bosonic did it or the way I did it. The key is we have to clear up in the contract so that all of us sitting here understand what we expect so that we can measure the performance. In any contract, if you're buying widgets, you want to know how many of the widgets you're going to buy, and you want to know what the cost is. We know what the cost is because we pay the bill quarterly, but the question becomes, what are the deliveries? And it's not clear in the contract because Mr. Bosonic did it one way, I did it another. We can do it by dollars and cents, but what is the way that both of us understand so that we can pick up the contract, as Ms. Tenberry suggested? This is what it says, this is how you do this, so that we are clear, the citizens sitting here are clear, knowing what we're paying for and what we expect to get back. That's, I think, I'm totally in agreement with her, because I did it one way, someone else does it another way, we do it by dollars and cents, that's a third way.
Ms. Tenberry?
And in conversations with Mr. Francis, that was one of the things he brought up. We have to, he used the word tweak, there may be a little bit more work on that part, to understand what is the right way to calculate our costs, what is the right way to understand if there's 25 people assigned to our contract, so to speak, how many hours would we expect to get a month? I think that's an important number for us to understand. I'm not suggesting that your reports aren't complete. I have no other report to look at. And so I'm assuming your numbers, which I put up there, are correct. So I think, as Mr. Francis has suggested several times in our conversations, we need to tweak the contract, we need to do some work on it so that we here and our citizens clearly understand the deliverable. And of course, being in business, Rick, you understand that.
Mr. Francis?
I think both methods, you end up at the same result. Either method you use doesn't change the hours that they record in Bedford on those monthly reports. Because that's a given, however you figure it, that's not going to change. So either method, you end up with the same results. I was just trying to state the method that's shown in black is a lot easier to understand. And, and when we're talking tweaking, I'm not talking changing the contract. I'm talking modifying some of the wording so that a layman like us can understand it.
Things?
Yeah, go ahead.
First and foremost, I did not write the contract, and neither did Mr. Bosonic. That was done prior to us, and we're, I mean, far as we're open to clarifying it if that's what needs to be done, and it probably does. I mean, if you're not understanding it, but let me touch base because Mr. Frederick said something about. He said about the monthly hours, and the reason this was, and I do know this about the contract, the reason it was done on an annual basis is because, generally speaking, your vacation times are in the summer. All right. Once in a while, we get a deputy who likes to snowboard, but that's not usually the case. So right. So sometimes, you can bank that, the holidays, spring break, 4th of July weekend, most people are taking their time off. And so that's why the contract was always on an hourly basis by the year, if that makes any sense to you.
Okay, Mr. Clemens has a question.
Tonight, given the subject matter, words matter. And specifics are important, and so I want to make sure that we stay very specific in our comments. And I don't mean this as a clarification or a correction, to Mr. Francis, but a clarification. In fact, if you look at the contract, the sheriff's office hasn't met the contract. They've exceeded it. And they've exceeded it year after year after year, and they haven't come to us looking for additional expenses. They haven't come with additional bills, and that's a fact that is relevant to this conversation. To say that the contract has been met is a disservice to what in fact we have received. So that everyone is clear, when you have a department that's freestanding and somebody breaks an ankle, you're now down by 1. When you have a sheriff's office contract and somebody breaks an ankle, guess what? We have a new deputy name and badge number appear on our report, but every single one of us can go to bed at night knowing that we still are receiving the same protection. And that's a fundamental difference that needs to be addressed, and it can't be overlooked or glossed over in this. You know, these numbers are the exact same numbers that the Law Enforcement Committee had when we did our report. I remember vividly, the committee was upset with me. They did not understand why we needed to look at hours. They did not like the fact that we had to go through 20 days to verify that, in fact, the work that was being reported was being done. And I said at that time, and I will say it now, it was to remove any doubt about were we getting the deliverable. So I realize that there may be some stylistic issues with the contract that people don't appreciate. I find it difficult to believe because this entire board, short of Lamar and I, voted for this contract. So either the language was bad when it got passed or somehow it's magically become bad over the last few years. But the contract hasn't changed. The service that we've received hasn't changed. Now, I'm all for if somebody's uncomfortable and there needs to be an addendum that explains how computations are made, that makes total sense. But I just want to be clear that this isn't a matter of a contract that has been met. That's not correct. We have received in excess of that contract, and I just want this board to be aware of that as we go through our continued conversations. Thank you.
Ms. Tinnever, did you have any follow-up questions?
You know, this isn't going to be Ms. Tinbury against the rest of the board.
It's not, but you still have questions on them numbers.
I pass.
Okay.
I'm not going to
Okay.
argue opinion. I have an opinion, TC has an opinion, Lamar, everybody has an opinion. There's nothing wrong with having a differing opinion. This
Yes.
is America. We live in America,
Yes,
thank heaven.
yes, there is. There's a difference between having an opinion and not understanding something the way that it's written up. Because after this meeting, I don't want to hear it anymore of we're being shorted, that's not right, that we need to look. This is it. So if we have questions to what's up there, let's get them out and get an understanding of it. I don't understand why that's, we can't get to there. Mr. Steiner?
You know, just to touch on adding to what Mr. Clemens said, and I was thinking this before he said it, it would be very simple to take this section of the contract, determine what it's supposed to say, all right? I do a lot of work in Excel spreadsheets and number crunching all the time. We could take and put a formula, agreed formula, how it works, that the Sheriff's Department agrees with, this board agrees with, addendum to the contract. You could plug a different number in there anytime that there is a salary change or anything like that, and it will come out. And you could do both. You could put one side showing the exact hours with the formula. You could put the other side showing the exact hours with the dollars.
I don't think it's a matter of
But I'm just saying,
what we're getting. I
everybody
think it's
would-
a matter of how they can backfill and who they can backfill with. I think
Right.
that's the big question.
But that's where I said earlier, what is wrong with law enforcement units? I agree with law enforcement units. Again, whether you used 18,000 or the 16,640, whatever number it is, as Mr. Clemens said, they've exceeded those hours, all right? Honestly, if I've got a deputy and he's not going to work his full hours because of training or sickness or vacation or whatever, do I really care that they backfilled it with a supervisor or somebody at a higher rank? Absolutely not. I think that's even better yet. I've got somebody at a higher rank that's backfilling, somebody that's got more authority. Not that they have to have it, but you know what? That's a person that if there's a regular contract deputy that needs somebody at a higher level to make a decision quickly, they've got the man right there at command closer to them.
Kemp, explain to the group the way you explained it the other day with like Hooper, okay? If we didn't have any contract deputies,
Okay.
Okay.
Well, let me touch base real quick with what Mr. Steiner just talked about. Last year, once again, I spoke about our staff shortage. We were bare bones. We had those individuals who, unexpectedly left. I had to backfill some shifts with supervisors. I used, Sergeant Zebek, traffic sergeant, come down. Now, once again, that is not his job assignment. That is not what he does on a normal basis. He's a supervisor. But he took his supervisor hat off, came down here, worked the road patrol. His rate of pay is higher than a deputy.
And we didn't get charged.
You did not get charged for that at all, okay? Detective Hooper, I think there's some confusion as to what we have in the department outside of the contract. We have four deputies working right now on the road patrol. So the other 11, townships that don't have police contract, there's only 4 people, maybe a trooper or 2. That's it. So, most of the time I have 2 or 3 officers. That's it. Go ahead.
I'm just speaking to, some people think, and why should Hooper be charged to the contract?
Okay.
He's not a contract deputy, but
Gotcha.
if we didn't have the contract, Hooper wouldn't be sitting next door. He would be in Monroe sitting.
He might not even be a
So,
detective anymore.
Would we see those same hours from Hooper?
Absolutely not.
That's the point, is why can't he be charged with the contract when,
Well,
if we didn't have a contract, we wouldn't see those hours from him? We might see him once in a while, but you wouldn't see him.
It's frustrating. What is frustrating, I guess, for me is I've heard a lot of rhetoric about that. He's one of the best detectives in the state of Michigan. He's a sign in your building. There's people who would love to have a guy like that working here. I mean, now imagine being him. He puts trackers on people's cars and gets up in the middle of the night and follows them around.
I don't think, I
try
guess
to,
we shouldn't use the name Hooper. We can use any name. It's just,
You're right.
he's somebody that's not an actual
Right.
contract deputy. So
No.
that's what I'm saying, is you could use the dare officer for his,
Yes.
I'm just saying it's just a name. It's nothing.
Yes,
We know
he's a general
does
fund
amazing job.
officer. The sheriff signs him down here to work on the cases in the township. He does to handle calls elsewhere. If we have, he helped us out a lot on the Chelsea Brook investigation, and we have major calls, and he's an expert when it comes to cell phones. So he does a lot of work on that. He doesn't log every single hour of his day here, but he works a lot. He worked, I think, 1,100 hours last year exclusively in Bedford Township on your calls.
Okay. Does anybody have, Mr. Navarre?
Okay, so, again, this isn't personal. We love Mr. Hooper, but what do we get? Our taxpayers pay into the public safety fund that goes to the sheriff, $1.96 million. Why are we paying for these deputies that should be part of that money that are, townships that don't have a contract get those deputies, but now we have to pay for them. We don't get anything for our 1.9 million. And I know you're going to tell me all about the other things, but do we ever get any contract deputy, deputies for that $1.9 million?
Yeah, you do. You got everything that's on that list right there, plus more. You have a supervisor. Every single shift of every day, you have a supervisor. Mr. Masonic, he can break it down for you more.
I think that's something important, though, like what he's saying. If we don't have a contract today, and we start our own police department in 90 days, we have to hire the supervisor, 2 lieutenants, the clerical. That all is paid for right now with what we have with the 10 deputies. Right now, we only pay for 10 deputies, so that's what you're,
Yes.
and I guess that's the point,
Supervision, detective bureau, the list goes on and on. I mean, there's a lot of services we provide to all the citizens, not just Bedford.
So as long as everybody on the board agrees to that, the numbers we're looking at are accurate, we understand it, can we work on the contract to where we could understand it a little bit more? With the suggestions and questions that you've had.
I'm very comfortable with clarifications to the contract. I think each of the parties to the contract The more they can clarify that, the better. I think I mentioned it earlier, Mr. Steiner pointed out, I think Mr. Clements, a unit, if you want to go on a unit basis and get away from, how many deputies are assigned here to how many units of law enforcement on an hourly basis. I mean, that's as narrowly defined as I can imagine in terms of a contract, in terms of you're either buying that widget, that unit of this service, or that unit of law enforcement. We can reduce it to that. And then maybe it's easier to track it in terms of these items. We still have to address, what are going to be the actual hours that would be provided to the township under the contract. But I think that's a very good point, I think, to start from.
Okay.
The other point that I wanted to and Major Kemp talked about it briefly, but, in terms of what the county provides kind of behind the scenes that we might not all be familiar with is, the county has some additional resources. We are a larger organization, but we struggle with finances. We have a whole plethora of public services that we're providing. Each year, our budget is balanced with reserves. We don't have a surplus in terms of how we're developing the budgets. The surplus comes from managing against the budget. And this year, we've got almost $500,000 coming out of our reserves to balance. But what we provide in terms of this partnership, in terms of being able to keep costs down, is that we take on big risks. And we take on big risks in terms of liability, workers' comp, and health care. And in each one of those, liability, we're going to take the first $300,000 of every claim. So think about your deductible. That's our deductible on every liability claim. We're going to take the first $300,000. When you look at your invoices and you look at those costs for your officers that are employed under the contract, I believe the net to the township is around $554. So there's an incident that's went on in the township here. We're defending that. It was our officers under the contract who were involved. We got the first $300,000. There's no coming back to the township on that. So when you look at that, that's a benefit there. When you look at workers' comp, we're going to assume all of that, the first $500,000, and health care. Okay, the first $150,000 of every health care contract that's out there. What does that mean for the township in terms of that cost sharing for each one of those professional law enforcement officers? We're driving those costs down by taking on more risk, and we're passing those costs on to the township in terms of the unit cost for that deputy over the course of the year. So those are things that we're comfortable in doing. We're comfortable taking on those risks because we think that we have good programs to manage those. But I just want the township to understand that by the work that we're doing and the risks that we're taking, we're kind of isolating you from that, but you're getting the benefit of those lower rates in terms of the total cost.
Does anybody else have any questions to the hours and to that particular question? Because that's been the biggest question that's been raised for a while now. So let's work on the contract end of it with, we'll consult with legal and figure out and bring it to the board and find a happy medium with that. Our next, does anybody? Our next question was that we talked about was what do we get if we didn't have the contract? And I think you've kind of cleared it up to the fact that, okay, say Bedford Township has 0 contract deputies and somebody calls 911 for a crash, with the limited people you have and the limited people the state has, you'll get somebody, but it might not be till tomorrow or it might be an hour.
Yeah, it just
all depends, but
Yes.
to say that Bedford Township gets 0 could be construed in a.
That's not accurate, no.
Okay.
That wouldn't be an accurate.
Because that's the talk out there. If Bedford Township,
That's
you
not
get
true.
nothing.
No, that's not true.
Mr. Francis?
And I don't think that ought to be equated to hours. What we send up to the county pays for our ability to have that service, whatever we need, when we need it, based on the availability of the staff that's in the sheriff's department. It's not hours, it's whatever service we need. If we had a murder down here or any, extreme incident, we're gonna get all kinds of people down here. You're gonna flood the place. It's not related to hours. I don't think it ought to be looked at hours. This part where we contract for 10, that should be looked at in hours or units or whatever we wish to charge. But what we pay to the county shouldn't be, in my opinion. And there's been some allegations that when they call them non-contract deputies are used to backfill, we're paying for those twice. I don't see it that way at all. Like we used Detective Hooper. If we did not have the contract, he would be down here if we had a case that required his expertise. and he was assigned down here.
Correct.
And that's all. When he's done, he's gone.
Correct.
When he backfills for somebody, he's here for that shift or for that period of time exclusively,
Yes.
unless he's called out to some other, and then we handle that with the 80-20 split, accounting for what that could be. So I don't think it's valid to say that we are paying for them twice when they're used to backfill.
Well, any officer, any deputy sheriff that is not a contract officer would be from the road patrol. That's what we would use. I mean, I don't have a bunch of spares laying around, so that's who I would take it from. And we do this exactly the same with all the contracts we have.
Okay.
Even the schools. I mean, if we have a school, they have an issue with the school, somebody who goes to training, I send a deputy to the school so they have somebody there.
Okay. One thing that's been brought up is, why does this board pay for the DARE officer? For Deputy Krupp to
Yes.
go and teach DARE. I personally don't have a problem with, as long as we're above and beyond the 16,640, I mean, with one of our contract deputies teaching it and us paying for it, as long as these kids are learning DARE. But if you guys want to explain it more, because that's something that's been talked about a lot too. Deputy Krupp's one of our assigned sheriff guys.
Yes,
he
he is a
teaches the
contract
DARE.
officer, and he does do DARE services within the contract and the school. The bottom line is that the DARE services we provide, and they're essential. I mean, that's a neutral environment for these kids to have contact with the police. What we're teaching right now is more important for these kids, I think, than anything else, especially with what we got going on with the opioid epidemic. They're not going to get that anywhere else. I mean, he's a trained officer. Once again, he bids, and he wants to work in your community. Okay, he bid here. If he bid a different community, he wouldn't be doing it because he'd be going somewhere else. So I think it's an important service. It's about 150 hours a year that he puts, and I've gotten a lot of very good feedback from the school. The extra school presence is important. The sheriff made it a point that after the Sandy Hook massacre, when he took office, that during the day shift, the deputies, if they're not on a call, he wants them stopping into all the schools. So we have extra school presence. It was one of the things we went in there and we decided to have Randy start doing that.
But the bottom line is those are on top of what we're already getting. So it's not like those hours from Deputy Krupp, the 150 hours, is coming out of the 16,640. You could consider that above and beyond what we're already getting.
You can. I mean, we spent almost as much time out of the contract responding to emergency calls in Erie Township or Whiteford Township or other areas where there was no police coverage.
Yeah.
And those calls are not within your community.
Because I personally feel it's important to have that relationship with the school.
I do too.
We've had conversations about adding an officer and sharing the cost with the school. I feel it's important to have our schools be the safest around. If the schools can't afford to man it, we need to work with them. So that's something we could talk about later, but.
The funding for everybody is stretched thin. It's not just the township. The schools are hurting too, and we have to pool our resources. I mean, that's just what we have to do to get things done. And I think cost sharing with the school for an officer is a really good idea. Mm-hmm. Other schools in the county have done it, and if you do consider it, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, I told you, I look at it as economic development. The safer the schools are, the more people are going to come to live here. Mr. Steiner, do you have something?
You said economic development, but I look at it a little differently than that. I look at it like your car, your house, your health care. That's preventive maintenance.
Agreed.
He's in there working with these young kids, whether it's drugs, whether it's bullying, and a lot of other activities revolve around what happens under drug activity. So you can branch it out multiple ways, and like I said, I look at it more of a preventive maintenance healthcare program for the individuals and the community.
Okay. So at this time, everybody's got their packet. These are the questions that, you want to say something on that? Go ahead.
No, I want to ask Mr. Bosanic a question.
Why did I put the numbers up there?
No.
I told him not to do that for the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
We're going to leave that up there.
Go ahead. I should have never done it.
Well, clearly, and a question I'm going to ask you is as follows. If I take your quarterly bill, and you've told us what the arithmetic mean salary. It's 112,000, 119, at least it was on this report. If I take your monthly report in terms of dollars and divide that by the cost per hour, would I not get the number of hours that were delivered? That's why I tried to do it with hours rather than dollars and cents. Because we were working with the 1,800 hours, we were working with all kinds of numbers, but none of it clearly expressed what we thought we were getting delivered. You tell us, and you and I have talked about this in other instances, you say my quarterly bill is $280,000 for a quarterly bill, and if I divide that by the average salary per hour of those officers in the road patrol, should I not get the number of hours delivered?
No,
That I would expect to get it delivered for that cost.
because what the invoice represents is the cost-sharing arrangement. That's kind of where I was coming from in the red marks that I've now removed from the board. But the invoice is based upon the 2,080 hours per officer, less the training, or not the training, but it's based upon the hours of each officer and the county's 20% supplement. So if you look down that invoice, you've got the cost, the rate for the officer, times the number of officers. That's the quarterly invoice. Any overtime that's been provided, the other expenses portion, that gives you the subtotal, less the county 20%. So we're not looking at hours worked. We're not billing on hours worked. We're billing on the contract, which is based upon 10 deputies. And that's why the suggestion, if you wanted to go to a unit of service provided, we can talk about that and how we would modify the billing going forward.
Well, the bottom line is in 5 more years, we want a different board to understand it
Sure.
in a very simple manner. That's the bottom line.
Sure as
so
I'm standing
this
here,
board,
the invoices that we're sending to Bedford Township are reflective of what's outlined in that invoice. And it's been invoiced this way for, people prior to me and others, understanding the contract in the same fashion, and the invoices that follow.
And I don't even know if it's understanding the contract for past boards. Maybe it's just not questioning it, But when we got questions coming to us about a specific question, that's when, you know what I mean, we really looked into it, and it was like, well, we really don't understand it either. I could say probably not one person on this board before we started all this probably understood all the questions on the contract to a T, because they're hard to understand. I mean,
Yeah.
they are.
And some things have evolved, and it's probably a good idea to do.
And at the end of this, I feel like everybody here will understand it, and be able to answer questions that come up.
The better understanding we have, I think, the better the partnership is.
Oh, absolutely. So everybody's got their packet here with the questions and answers that we come up with and submitted to the Sheriff's Department. There's roughly 10, right? Give or take a couple. 10 to 15. There's a number of questions. Does anybody have any questions or any clarity that we need to the questions and the answers that we've gotten? Those were the 2 main ones that I had, and I think our group come up with. The main ones was the hours that we needed to kind of go over. So at this time, if anybody has any that they want to go over. Ms. Tenenberry?
Well, to tell you the truth, I thought the answers were very confusing, and they didn't answer the actual question, so these relate to that. In section 2.2, I don't know who would respond to this, but 2.2, it talks about training, supervision, and conduct. The sheriff shall be responsible for the training, supervision, et al. Continue on with that. And in section 3.1, it says that, wait a minute, is it 3.1? 3.3, I'm sorry. It says that we will pay for vacation days, personal days, sick days, and training days. So to me, it's a duplication. Are we being double dipped, or who pays for training?
We generally I mean, I guess, I don't know, are you talking about for like the training classes?
I'm talking about
Or the
what the
deputy's wage.
contract says. I would hope you would know what the contract says. I'm reading the contract. It says in one section that it'll be paid for by the sheriff, in another section it says it's part of what we pay for.
If we send an officer to DARE school, we're sending 3. It costs about $5,000 roughly for the class. The sheriff's office pays the bill. If, let's say, that particular officer is working here, maybe DARE's a bad example, evidence tech school.
Say what?
Evidence tech school, let's use evidence tech school. I want to have a deputy who wants to go to evidence tech school. And it's a week-long class and it costs $1,200. The cost of that class, we pay for. The person that goes there, the wage, if they're assigned here, that would fall underneath the contract for the payment, up to the 35 days, the 220 hours.
So could we clarify that in the contract?
We absolutely could. And remember something, when this contract was written, we didn't do a lot of training. I mean, this contract's fairly old, and the standards are, have changed a lot over the years. And so we send people to more training than, I sent one officer last year from the contract. He went to training he had 46 days where he was off between training and work. Of course, you guys didn't know that, but that's something we paid for, dive training, FTO training. We paid the freight on that. And his hours were backfilled. But yes, we can clarify that.
Okay. Okay, so we'll work on that question then. Anybody else have any more questions?
I have more.
Ms. Tinneberry, just keep going. And then we'll keep going
I
through.
mean, I don't want to dominate. I'm sure I'm the only one
Dominic,
with them.
that's what we're here for.
Section 2.7 in the contract says.
You say 2.7?
Yes. It says, "The sheriff shall give sufficient notice to the local unit to allow sufficient time for the local unit to request a substitute upon vacation, personal days, and training periods." Is that being done?
That is not being done, and the reason being is and what that means is if I have an officer who's going to be gone for 2 weeks on vacation, if you wanted that person's time filled, you could request, I want an extra person for them, and then the township would be billed. Okay, that's not been done, as far as I know, since I've been here.
So if somebody's gone 2 weeks,
If so-
do you backfill?
Yes, usually there's not a problem, we always have staffing.
So,
We've never billed the township.
because to be honest with you, I don't want you calling me, asking me if you want a guy backfilled. I mean,
Yeah, normally
I
you
don't
just do
know.
it.
You know what I mean? It's like, if somebody needs to be backfilled, I'm just saying, I'm not saying
It's not
arguing with the
about
question.
you, it's
I get
about
it.
the board.
I get
Does
it.
the board want it? I
But they
mean,
would call me, though, if somebody needed to be backfilled. So if you're backfilling them on your own, I guess that's where the clarity
Yeah.
needs to be cleaned up a little bit.
It was just basically saying above and beyond, if you want coverage above and beyond what was specified in the contract, you would be billed for it.
So you're saying over and above the billable contractual hours? That's what that requested?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't count your backfill, so that's where you automatically move somebody into that slot to do the backfill.
Correct.
So I mean, maybe a little gray, it could be cleaned up a little bit. I mean, I don't think it's light gray, it's pretty dark gray, so maybe turn it black.
We're not doing it, though. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're not calling.
But they're not asking, he's not trying to fill somebody, he's doing a regular backfill. What he just mentioned is over and above the standard backfill.
Sure.
Which he's not doing it, he's not requesting it because he's not filling and billing us for it.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So I think that's where it could be cleaned up, though.
That's what I say, it's not light gray, it's pretty dark gray. Let's turn it to black and white. That's not that hard to do. To me, that's
Does
a
that
small.
clean it up for you, Nancy, or is that still?
Yes, it cleans it up. He said that he'd be willing to clean up the language because it's not the practice. This is the contract, and I don't believe in just enforcing parts of the contract and ignoring the other parts of the contract. There's other things in the contract that I don't believe are being done, but, let me just suffice it to say, because I think we could end this in about 5 minutes when I stop asking my questions. Let's just say communication is what we're talking about. It's simply about communication. It was said earlier from one of the board members that we and this board approved the contract that exists. We asked for communication at the time. It was refused. And so, we didn't want to end up with no coverage. We wanted to be able to have coverage for our citizens. So what were we to do? We could either vote against the contract because we were refused to have communication, or we could vote in the contract. And we could have settled all of this long time ago had there been open communication and transparency. I'm done.
Well, I've been called multiple times by the township officials, and I don't think I've ever turned anybody's phone call down. If there is, I apologize.
No.
I've never received a phone call from
Before
you.
this contract was signed, I didn't say under your tenure.
Okay,
It's not personal.
does anybody
I don't take it personal.
else have any questions on the contract? Mr. Fredericks?
No.
You didn't hear? Anybody else have any comments or concern with the packet, with the Q and As that we've gotten back? Mr. Francis?
Not a question, but just to maybe summarize a little. We've talked about 2 or 3 or 4 sections in the contract that might need a couple of wording changes. We can work on that and come back with a recommendation or at least a scenario. We also have talked earlier about maybe developing a multi-year contract, like maybe 3 or 5 years, something like that, that we could put into place if the sheriff's department is amenable to something like that. And because we think I personally think it's a valuable relationship to keep going. We've been in it for 40 years, as someone mentioned earlier, and I think we've gotten, by and large, tremendous service from it.
Well, that
And-
was,
And I just think we need to clean up some of these things, maybe go for a multi-year contract, and move on.
that was the thing that we had talked about quite a bit, was if we can get to the point where this group understands this contract and we all agree to it and we can work with the changes, why not put a 5-year contract in place? That way we can lock in that 80-20. The group has continuity going forward in the future, and everybody's happy. I did want to talk a little bit about, if we're is everybody past this? Does anybody else have any questions? Any more questions?
I just have a comment.
Mist-
We were just talking about 5 years. I guess I'm a little confused because the last time we approved this was July 7, 2015. Heath Veliquit spoke to it, explained the amendment, and the length of time the contract would be extended to would be indefinite, with allowances
Well,
for either side.
It's an automatic renewal every year.
Correct.
So I'm saying,
Correct.
in November, if we didn't want to renew the contract, you know what
We
I'm
have to
saying?
give notice.
You have to give notice. This gives.
Either party could do
Correct.
it.
Either
Whereas
party.
if you had a
This right
5-year
here-
contract, neither party could
Yeah,
change it.
it kind of locks in and
Not
gives
at all.
continuity. That way, every year, you get a new board, oh, we want to look at it again. So now this shows, hey, there's a 5-year contract in place, we have continuity, we're locking in the 80-20, and we can, and that brings me to my next point. Because I feel like if we're willing to move the questions to a board or night and make decisions on the contract, 5-year, what have it, I feel like we can pretty much stop this whole thing tonight, because we've got what we've come up with, what we think is what it would look like if we had our own police department. This is what well, at least myself, Paul, and Mr. Frederick kind of agreed to, that and it's right around $1.45 million for us, that we think would be an apples to apples, our own police department, if we got rid of the sheriff's contract, which is roughly, $200,000, above and beyond after vehicles, which we think is, Mr. Clemens thinks there's some things missing out of here. We think there might be some things missing out of here. There's unknowns with it. So, and the way Mr. Fredericks explains it is good, because if we start our own police department, our millage goes by, because we can only use our millage for sheriff's deputies. We can't use it for our own police department. So that money's gone. So I think you said in 3 years, if we started our own police department, we would be in our rears. 30,000 or something like that within 3 years. So if everybody's in agreement to that, we don't need to have another meeting on this specifically because it's too far gone. And this is why we wanted to do this, because this will be on record if everybody's in agreement to it, along with the other information, that going forward, okay, we agree that we're getting a pretty good deal with our 80-20 rate with our sheriffs. We understand the contract. It's going to get changed a little bit. They have continuity, we have continuity, we know what we're going to be paying in the future. We wanted to understand it and compare to what we have to what we could have, so that's what we've done. I'm all for not looking at it any further and moving on and talking to Mr. Goldsmith and you guys about working on a 5-year contract and setting it for, you know, a few meetings out to give us some sufficient time to look at, but that's just me.
And me being just me, I think we ought to have another meeting because we haven't had a chance to present what our little ad hoc committee has come up with and the rationale for those. And there's 4 or 5 different scenarios and any number of additional scenarios, all based on staffing levels. We haven't even talked about that as a board, and I think we should before we, well, just approve it and go on with continuing the contract. I think we need another meeting for that. I think tonight's meeting was very valuable in getting some questions asked and answered and some discussion about it. And I think everyone that had an additional question has asked that already tonight. I might be wrong, but that was our intent, is to get those questions out. That's just one leg of it. Then the next step would be to present, okay, here's some scenarios if we were to do our own versus minor adjustments made to the contract that we have now, and then say, board, which do you want us to do?
But the only other scenarios that we've come up with are staffing levels, how many officers. We
I know,
feel
and
like.
we haven't talked about it at all as a board, and I think we should. And we haven't presented it to them, and I think we should. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Clements?
I'm going to beat a dead horse here, and I apologize. So far, everything that your committee has done is nothing more than a replicate of what the Law Enforcement Committee did. There is a complete summary. There are numbers that can be backed up because the research was done. It was a public group that was commissioned by this group that met in the open. I will tell you, this is going to sound very much like I'm taking my ball and going home, and for those that judge me for that, that's fine. I will not sit through another Cal meeting on this subject. It is disrespectful to the deputies that work here. It is disrespectful to the citizens who pay taxes and expect us to manage real issues in this community. And there is no argument that can be made where this somehow is an issue that is in our top 10 priorities as a board. We have roads, we have salaries, we have a budget coming up, and yet we're still dawdling around this police department discussion. In 1995-96, this was considered, and it was deemed to be undoable. In 2005, it was discussed, and it was deemed to be undoable. And you can discuss it every year, you can run numbers all you want, but until this township is prepared to do 2 things: charge you 3 times what you're paying right now for services, and inform you that we will have all the liability. Not only the liability should somebody get hurt, not only the liability should someone get hurt in the public, but also the responsibility to our employees for workers' comp, health coverage, et cetera. So no disrespect intended to anyone, but for anybody to intellectually say we need to stare at these numbers anymore, I feel like is insulting, because the Law Enforcement Committee worked very hard to provide this board. This board was provided the information. Mr. Supervisor, I told you downstairs in the hall that my phone hasn't rang. No one thought enough in the last 6 months to pick up the phone and say, just want to ask a question. You certainly took time to meet with others who were represented on the board who very clearly have an agenda, but no one reached out to anybody else to say, can you explain how your take on the numbers? Because I will tell you, the facts aren't always the facts. The facts are the light you shine on the facts. But I will challenge anybody here to come up with a budget that is doable, that does not expose our community to excessive liability, and would be irresponsible for us as a board. So respectfully, you can meet all day long. I will tell you right now, I will not be in attendance at any more cows as it relates to law enforcement in Bedford, because it is simply a waste of our taxpayers' time and energy.
Mr. Francis?
Can I respond? TC, the reason I brought it up is this: if we don't have another meeting, what in effect are we doing? We're making a decision at a meeting called to make no decisions.
There's
This
no
meeting was-
motion before the board. There's no decision, there's nothing pending by this board right this minute. We are required to do nothing right this minute. And we've already said that we're going to tweak contract language, improve it, which I would respectfully ask that this time when we tweak contract language, that we all get to see it as a board before it goes north. But when that contract language is tweaked, that's the finality. And I don't mean any disrespect, Paul. You know I respect you and the work you guys have done, but I can't imagine or figure out why we keep pretending that we have to keep chasing this. I don't get it. There's no logical explanation
gotta
for why
have
we're doing
closure.
this. Yeah,
have to have
we need
closure.
closure. We
That's the
absolutely
bottom
have to,
line.
and I said Tuesday night, in the absence of logic, you are left with ignorance or arrogance. And I can only think of one of those two reasons as being the reason why this continues to rear its head. That's all I have. Sorry, I went well long-winded.
That's all I have, wants closure. That way in a year, when somebody comes in the office and says, why don't we have our own police department, I go, this is why. We haven't been able to do that, but now we can, because this is going to be completed. When somebody walks in the office and says, hey, what does the contract say about this? I can answer it, you know? Before this, I don't.
You can
many
pull the
people could.
contract and show them very clearly what
Very
it says,
clearly
because
what
it's
it
no
says.
longer gray.
So, I mean, our goal has been achieved. It took us too long to get to it for a lot of reasons, but I don't want to get into a lot of the reasons, but it took us a long time, too long to get to. But does anybody else have any disagreement? Because I agree with Mr. Clemens. We need to move forward. It's too far gone. It's too, I mean, it's just, right now with the millage, we pay roughly around $600,000 with the millage for all 10. That's our cost out of our general fund. We start our own police department, we're gonna have to come up with a lot more money because our millage is gone, and to have same coverage is saying 1.45 million, so that's right around $900,000. We can't afford it. So I agree with Mr. Clements, we don't need to have another meeting. We need to move on and work on the contract, you know, in a longer-term one, and talk about adding an officer with a partnership with the schools. That's where I am sitting right now. If anybody disagrees, that's fine. We can have another meeting if the board agrees to do that, but let's, you know, I'm open to it. Otherwise, we're going to move into public comment. Mr. Bassani?
Mr. Supervisor, I'm not really, I'm going to pick up at the tail end, not really public comment if I'm allowed. We're happy to meet with, I think rather than drafting documents on both sides in language, I think it's far more efficient and more productive to just sit down across the table. If you've got a group of people that you can assemble, you know, we're happy to do it from our side and at least get a pretty good framework, understanding that you'll have to go back to your township board as a whole to review the language, but I'd like to at least work through a tentative amendment to the contract that clarifies these items. I just think it's much more efficient with our time instead of going back, drafting something, we're going to rewrite
agree.
it, draft it back. Let's just sit across the table, what don't you understand? We can try to clarify that, and if that helps, we're willing to do that as soon as you're ready to do it. But you'll have to check with your council as to who may be allowed. Certainly, myself and the sheriff's representatives would be our side of it to go through it and help with the language, and
Well,
maybe it's an advantage to have legal counsel who
Does
represents
this board
both of
agree that,
us.
I mean, we obviously share the same legal counsel. Should we seek outside counsel on our end, or can we fine with using the same legal?
I would suggest that I think Mr. Goldsmith is very familiar with the contract. He sat here tonight. He's listened to the spirit and the areas in which we'd like to see improvement. I think, quite honestly, it would be a waste of resource and time to not ask him to go put it together. He's going to bring it back to us for an ultimate vote anyway, and I would move forward with absolute confidence that he'll get it
I just
taken
want to be
care of.
clear, because it has been brought up, that we shame the same legal, and there's, you know, discrepancies with that, so I just wanted to throw it out there. Mr. Steiner?
I would agree with Mr. Clements, and another thing too is if we go to outside counsel, they're going to charge you more money on top of that, so it's going to cost us more in the long run. Obviously, since I work full-time, my schedule would not allow to even request being part of the committee. I want to say right now, and whoever's on this committee,
Well, let's just keep one thing straight, though.
Right.
The board, we're not forming a committee unless the board votes to form a committee.
right, but,
This would be
well, the group.
myself,
Let's take
and
the
a
word
couple of
committee out.
people.
The
Yeah,
group
take
of
the word
whoever,
committee out, 'cause
whoever
it's-
decides the final tweaking of the language, let's put it that way.
Okay.
I strongly want to recommend, as I've stated a number of times, and Mr. Masonic has stated it, and they've repeated it, I want us to look strongly at law enforcement equivalents or law enforcement units. I think that will clarify a lot in the gray area. But again, that's up to whatever the group wants to recommend back to this board. And I think it sounds like it's probably a good idea to the sheriff's department.
Well, let me just say this, everybody shoot me an email of the questions you have where we need clarity, and I'll give Mr. Bosonic a call next week, and we'll, you know, probably get Paul, and, you know, we'll figure it out.
2 points, Mr. Supervisor. Number one, I mean, we're comfortable if council sits on behalf of the township. I don't view this as an adversarial working group in terms of the effort that we're putting forth here. We have other council, our labor council, if you're comfortable, it would represent the county if need be. I don't really see the need actually for council on our part, just from the view of what we're trying to achieve here. And the other point is, there's a number of other counties across the state who have local unit contracts. I'll pull some of their contracts, see what they have in. It may help us in terms of getting some language that's already being used in other contracts. So it's the neat thing about public sector, there's no secrets, so we can share that information.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Can I add one thing? I'd just like to address the board, you know, this is on a personal level. You know, there's no animosity from the sheriff's office side. You know, as politicians, you are representing the people. And it is important that you know what you're doing. And I think that's more important than anything else. That's what you got elected for. So looking into this, clarifying these issues, having a good working relationship is important to us. And I look forward to getting this taken care of and moving forward. And I appreciate your candidness with us.
Well, I could tell you this, I can't help what words people put in my mouth on social media, but I can tell you this, the goal from the start on both sides has been to understand the contract and compare to what we would have on our own. It's that simple. And that's what we've done. So I look forward to moving on. So
Thank you.
I'm going to open it up to, you got one more thing?
Earlier, Mr. Pasonic, I asked if we could convert dollars to hours. I didn't bring my other calculation, so I just did it now. And if I take your rate at $28,029 per person, divide by 53.90, which is the hourly rate, make that for a whole year, it comes out to 2,080 hours. And if I take 80% of that, guess what I get? 16,640. That's how I did one of the calculations, taking it from dollars to hours. Comes out the same either way I work it.
Mr. Clements?
Mr.
Good.
Supervisor.
I'm outta here.
I just wanted to suggest, I know Mr. Bosonic has given up a very special event to be here tonight.
Yes.
And I would only like to suggest that if we don't have any more questions, that we would relay that so he could have the option to leave if he wants to get out of here. And just say thank you for passing up on that event. I truly appreciate you being here.
If no further questions, you are free to go, Mr. Bosonic.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you next week.
Calls me up
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Comments are limited to 3 minutes.
Can we have them sign in?
Can everybody sign in, I guess? Is there?
That way I have,
I don't think I have to sign in. Logan
I know
Tisdale.
Logan.
You just gave away
Signature.
$95,780.30 in taxpayers' money. You have the names of 14 officers that were sent to us that were the contract officers for 2017. 7 of those officers worked the full year. Only 3 of them gave you 1,800 hours. They worked a total of 15,778.75 hours out of 18,000 hours that was required to work, which comes to 2,221.25 hours that we were shorted for the 18,000 hours we were supposed to work. That's after giving them 35 days off a year for each person, which comes out to 280 hours per person, and that's what you gave them. My question is, we pay for 10 people. You got the names of 14 because there were people that were moved for whether or not they were on disability or whatever, and they backfilled them with those 4 people. The bottom line is, what happened to those people for 277 days? Did they evaporate? Did they get raptured? Well, I know they didn't get raptured. I'm still here. What happened to them? There are so many flags that go up here that the United Nations don't even put up as many flags as we did today. And every one of them is red. You can call this whatever you want. You can make numbers all day long. Those numbers are absolutely wrong. The 80-20 rate is about money, not about hours. Mr. Pasonic was right. He bills you on a quarterly basis. If you look at it, it says $28,000 per officer. You times that by 10. If you want to know how much they make a year, you take the $28,000 times it by 4. Then you divide it by 2080. That gives you the hourly rate. Pretty simple. I'm not a CPA, not a Juris Doctor, but I also am not stupid. But you just blew away $95,000 of our taxpayers' money. And if the Sheriff's Department wants to stay down here, fine. Let them write a little bit more tickets, make me happy. But the bottom line is this: when it comes to money, the hours are for the 10 people we pay for. We do not get any consideration for county general fund deputies, which we pay $2 million for. And that's our share out of the other, and 14 other townships pay their share. That means we get no coverage down here at all. And you people didn't want to see that tonight. That's exactly what it is. I've spent more time looking at those numbers than anybody on this board, I guarantee you. And I'm not dumb. I know how to add and subtract. My 9-year-old granddaughter could do the math on this. And I came to you people with the hopes that you would at least try to get back that money we were overbilled. You didn't even make an effort at it. And you know what? That's appalling. I'm not here against the Sheriff's Department. I know probably more deputies than most people know, and I've been a police officer for 23 years. The bottom line is it's not about them tonight. It's about the money that we're paying for. And if we want to contract with 10 people, that's fine, but give me the 18,000 hours.
Thank you for your comments. Any more comments?
You want me signing right here? Todd Bruning, 2980 Consier Road, Lambertville, Michigan. I'm just here tonight to support the sheriffs that we have. I mean, I knew this thing was coming up. And the service that they provide us, it can't be matched. I mean, the few times I've had to deal with them, and they have, like my break and everything else, Hooper was there. We're getting more than what we're paying for. Now, I know some people are more concerned about tickets. Being a retired state trooper, that's what those guys do, tickets. The ramp roosters, the B team, that's what they know are tickets. The sheriffs are the infantrymen. They're the ones, I don't want them writing tickets. You know what? I don't care if they're sitting at sidelines. When the burglary call comes in, they're able to respond. That's what I want. Tickets, I'm not worried about. So I don't even care if we are wasting money. We're getting more than what we're paying for. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Any more? Any more comments?
My comment is, why are we here tonight? Why have you guys done this? Why have you put these guys on edge, not knowing if they have a job tomorrow because you might contract? What you guys have done is pitiful. What you guys are doing is pitiful. Nancy, I give you credit for asking the questions you've asked. You guys have used me as a scapegoat, which is sad because I've lost friends. There's nobody, you guys have made this personal. You've said 3 times, Paul, the teams, the sides, whose side. This isn't a thing about sides. You asked this committee to study the financial end of it. It's not been even discussed, really, the financial end. You guys have had a plethora of information given to you that you are ignoring. And it's sad. And how did this all start? Why did this even start? Why did everybody have to go through this? Why did these guys have to go through this? Why did I have to go through this? It makes no sense. It's sad to see how this has went down. It's sad to see the lives that have been hurt. It's sad to see relationships that have been broken. I apologize to you deputies. I apologize to the Sheriff's Department. I was asked to do a task as a taxpayer of Bedford Township. They asked me to do this. I took on the task. This is nothing personal at all. It's financial.
Can you please address the chair?
I'm a taxpayer of Bedford Township. You guys have been given the numbers that you asked me to get. Here they are. I'm done. These are yours. I just want to say this has been a travesty. And it started through the campaign and through campaign promises that we're going to get our own police department. Why do we bring that up if we don't even talk about it? Why did we go through this? I've been working on this for 1.5 years now. Why? This is sad. Very sad. And Nancy said it's about communication. Part of it is when you have your sheriff tell you, Mr. Peroni and Al Pryor, that I hope Bedford does get their own police department because they're a pain in my ass. That's not good for you guys. And I don't blame you guys, it's your leadership. Your leadership is why we're here, a lack of communication with your leadership. So the beef is with him. We didn't have to have this meeting tonight. You guys could have done everything you did at this board right now in a private meeting, and a meeting to go over a contract. If it's all about the contract, why did you drag everybody through this?
Thank you for your comments. Any more comments from the public?
My name is Robin Bush, 215 West Substation Road. I've been a member of 4 committees for Bedford Township. I was on the Planning Commission, I was on the Zoning Commission, I served on the Grants and Loan Commission, and I was asked to serve on the Law Enforcement Committee. We worked our butts off on that committee. Our meetings were open. Our meetings were in the public eye. Any one of you can FOIA or go back and look at the minutes of what we discussed. At no time did we meet in private to discuss anything. Our data is irrefutable. I know that my data came from irrefutable sources, and I can cite every single one of them. Everything that you're talking about now was given to you in a packet that the Law Enforcement Committee put together. I think it's one of the best executive summaries I've ever seen in my life. And I personally am disappointed that at no time did you call an actual member of the Law Enforcement Committee and ask us any of the questions that you must have asked in the meetings that you had. And I'm going to say, Mr. Francis, Mr. Frederick, and Paul, I'm disappointed that you guys made the decision to meet with other members of our community, and you didn't make that process open and transparent like we did on the Law Enforcement Committee. That should have been the way that it was done. This should have been wrapped up when we gave you the executive summary. What we recommended is where you actually have ended up. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any more comments from the public?
Gail Kane, 1056 West Temperance. First off, I'm disappointed the public got no copies. And my real concern is that there's going to be another committee. To that ad hoc committee, Mr. Peroni said he used experts. I'm going to presume that that means experts in police work. I would love for somebody to share with me the list of criteria that he used to make the determination as to who or why those people are experts. I have not heard any specific names of the alleged experts. There was this one, ex-deputy, et cetera, et cetera. You should release the names of those who received your special invite. Finally, as I reviewed the suggested contract changes from what I could find, number 6 states that the sheriff has to allow the township supervisor or his designee the ability and right to assign duties or activities. Heaven help us. Okay? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the state statute says the supervisor gets 2 jobs. He is to act as a chair for township meetings, and he can serve as an assessor if trained, if there is not a designated job for such. That's it, folks. The supervisor and/or his designee does not have the power or the authority to own or control any other elected official. That's all of you. And he has no authority and no power over any county employee. The supervisor and his designee are employees of me. I am the boss, okay? I'm a taxpayer, these are taxpayers, you're taxpayers. That's who they work for. I don't work for them.
Heaven help us.
If we need, thank goodness is right, if we need our own police department, then maybe we need to look at changing the designation to something other than general law township. In the meantime, I vote to leave the county sheriff's department, stay as they are, and continue to work in a collaborative effort with all the other ones that they work with at a time of need, and that they will continue to provide us our police protection. TC, thank you for the work that your group did. Lamar, I applaud you for stepping up and saying enough is enough, we're putting an end to this. Let's get one more committee to end the nonsense. But it wasn't open. So hopefully, this is it. It's done, finished.
Thank you for your comments. Any more comments from the public? Okay, seeing none, I just want to say I thank everybody for being here tonight. It has been a long process. I said at the last Tuesday's board meeting, everybody had an opportunity to look at this, to look at what the Law Enforcement Committee did. We decided that we needed to work together to get it done, to bring closure. Every meeting we were being pushed. What's going on? What are we doing? But nobody stepped up. So we decided to do that, to bring closure. And that's what we've done tonight. So we've brought closure. I look forward to working with you guys even closer than I have. I think the relationship, even when dealing with this, has been good. I deal with Moody on a regular basis. He's great to work with. Always very responsive, always takes my calls even after hours. And when I need him somewhere, he's there. So I appreciate that. So I look forward for the relationship to even grow and get this longer contract in place. I appreciate everybody's efforts. I think we've completed our task to understand the contract and compare what we've got to what we could have. So thank you all for being here. We stand adjourned.